Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Well, welcome back to the Driving Change podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Bloomfield. And as you all know that have been listening to this show for a while now, I have a special place in my heart for storytellers and for creatives and for those who can take us deep into the emotion of characters and help us feel something and help us learn something about ourselves through the way they've exposed us to characters that maybe we didn't even expect to identify with. And today's guest, it's such an honor. This guy is a pillar of creativity, of change in the universe, of what he's done with his gifts and talents in the world over several decades. Eugene Lee is not just an accomplished actor and playwright and director. He's known for his contributions in theater, television, film. He's been an advocate for everything in some of the racial tensions that have gone on in our culture and how we can unify each other as a culture in both the Hispanic, the African-American, and us in the white community. What can we do to be better together, to help each other? I love his heart. I love his background. You might know him from roles in shows like General Hospital or The Women of Brewster Place or Quantum Leap or Frasier or Touched by an Angel or NYPD Blue. And I could list everything he's been in, and it would take the entire episode because he's been these creative, emotionally based characters for his entire career in the acting on the film and TV side. But in theater and Broadway, Eugene has really been a significant figure, especially been recognized for his contributions to the works of August Wilson, one of America's great playwrights. If you're not sure who that is, he's performed in productions of several of Wilson's plays, which chronicle the African-American experience in the 20th century. Now, his performances in these plays, as you might know him from some of his TV characters, have always been lauded for this depth of authenticity and emotional intensity. He's acted alongside of so many of today's greats like Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson and Oprah, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, you think he was done with his gifts in acting, but really now, if you think about it, he's beyond acting. He's making his mark and has made his mark as a playwright. So he doesn't just act it, he can write it. His work in this area includes recently this play, East Texas Hot Links, which has received critical acclaim for his exploration of race and violence and survival. And in fact, it's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Right now, this play is, the way you think about this play, it's set in an all-black bar in East Texas in 1955, and it talks about the tensions and dynamics among the patrons of this bar over the course of a single explosive night. Now, why am I telling you that? Because if you're in the Chicago area, coming up here, East Texas Hot Links is opening at the Court Theater in Chicago on September 6th. We'll get into more of that later. But I could talk all day about all of his accolades, but Eugene's work definitely continues to inspire and influence audiences and artists, really solidifies his legacy. And he's a teacher. He's teaching in the university today. He's passionate about taking everything he's learned and giving it back to the next generation of creatives in this space. So that's a long wind up, but Eugene, I wanted to try to do you a little bit of justice. Welcome to the Driving Change podcast. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, man.
So as I forewarned you in the pre-show, like what we really want to do is let the audience get to know Eugene Lee. And we like to do that by take us all the way back. Like, give us your origin story and tell us a little bit about that and where you come from and who influenced you and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, it was 2:00 in the afternoon of July 16th, 1953 in North Brunswick, New Jersey, in my grandmother's house, is when I entered the world. And with the assistance, the cord was wrapped around my neck. So my aunt ran around the corner and got the midwife who came in and finished my birth, but, unwrapped the cord. And I was then taken to the hospital where they didn't want to let me in at first because I wasn't born in that hospital. Anyway, that was the day I was born. And from there, my dad was stationed at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, in Piscataway, New Jersey. And when he got out, I left New Jersey in my mother's arms, and we moved to East Texas. We moved to just outside Crockett, Texas, and which is where my dad grew up. And from there, we moved to the city in Fort Worth. Not long after that, I don't remember how long it was, but I grew up. I spent I went to school in Fort Worth during the school year, and every summer they'd ship us down to Big Mama's house in the country and down to the farm, and that's where I spent all my summers. And that's my origin story. That's where I learned to bloom, so to speak. That's where I learned about the truth and how important it is in life. Yeah, yeah. I got lying beat out of me. I couldn't tell a lie if I tried to.
Now, who was Big Mama?
Big Mama's my dad's mother, Joella Scott, and she was a teacher at the colored school down in Kennard, Texas. One of the teachers at the colored school, and my dad only went to, I think I'd heard, 6th or 8th grade. I always thought that was interesting that she was a teacher, but he never did really graduate from school. He did get a GED later on in life, but she was one of my first teachers, if you know what I mean. And she taught me not just what was in a book. They had me reading by the time I was 4 years old. I was that little kid that they encouraged and pushed out to be a credit to my race. Um, so yeah, they had me reading early. I was reading from the Bible at 4. They lied about my age and started me in first grade at 5 in Fort Worth. That's why when I graduated from high school, I was 16. When I graduated, when I graduated from college, I was 20. So when I first started teaching, I had students in my class as old as I was almost when I started high school, when I first came out of college. But Big Mama and my dad and my mom and my Aunt Evelyn, who was a teacher as well. My dad's sister. That's where I got my teaching chops from. That interest in being a teacher. But I've kind of grown to believe that we're all teachers. That's our responsibility to each other. That's kind of how mankind has advanced as far as he has. By everything I've learned, I've grown it and I've shared it with you, and you've grown it and shared it with someone else. And that's how knowledge and lore has come down, through storytelling to science and everything else. So we all teach each other. That's right. Our responsibility, to not just teach, but to learn from. So yeah, that's kind of how I see what I do. Actually, is I just have a bigger classroom now than I had when I was teaching high school.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, so you had a penchant you were a good learner, obviously, as a kid, and you picked up stuff fast. You were smarter than the average bear. You're kind of a little bit ahead of your peers, not only literally, because they put you in, started school earlier than you maybe were supposed to. Then I think you were one of the first folks that were in more of the integrated school in high school, right? And what was that experience like? And then where in that experience did you start to find yourself being drawn to acting or the creative side of the expression of the creative side of who you were? Because you're more of an intellectual kid, it sounded like, pretty smart and really good in all this, as a student. But then that creative element got sparked somewhere in that journey.
Well, yeah, it was there all along too. I mean, I'd give speeches in church. During the holidays for Easter, I'd read the scripture in church. Out loud, read from the Bible. So yeah, I was always called on to be a little show pony. And even in when I went to junior high school in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, I could take Spanish. And I learned to speak Spanish, so I'm fluent in Spanish now. I just took to it, I don't know why. I can't say why. I just did, but I learned this I started learning it in a segregated school. They didn't integrate the schools here in Fort Worth until I was in the 10th grade, and I had a choice at that time. I brag all the time that integration wasn't really, in a lot of ways, a great thing. In a lot of places, I got so much love with my learning, and I got a work ethic from my Black teachers. When I never sat in a room with a white person until I was in the 10th grade, and that didn't bother me. I still learned, and when I did go into the integrated school, I realized that I was as smart as and smarter than most of them. But
Right.
I'm certain that was because of the work ethic that was instilled in me from my black teachers. I was told that I was going to have to do 300% in America just to be recognized, and I took that literally. You know, everything from the spelling bees to the oratory contests or competitions and things like that, and any opportunity to to be a credit to my race. You know, I was that kid that was pushed out there to be that, and I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared then. I ain't scared now. Um, but my freshman, my I guess it was my first year in high school of integration. in I had done a couple of plays in junior high school, you know, in the drama club, and I'm certain that the drama teacher at the high school had seen that on my record. She saw my grades and stuff, and so she pulled me out of my biology class one day, and they were doing a production. The drama class was doing a production of a play called "You Can't Take It With You." It's you know, I guess it's a white family in the 30s, a weird family. You know, they got explosives and things happening in the basement and a bunch of other stuff happening. But they have a maid named Reba, and Reba has a boyfriend named Donald. And they had a black girl in the class, but they didn't have a black guy. So they didn't have anyone to play Donald. So she gave me the script and asked me to take it home and read it and come back and let her know if it was something I'd be interested in doing. And, you know, then she would have my schedule change and get me moved into her class and I would be in the show. So I took it home and read it. And basically, Donald is a lazy, shiftless N word, you know. And this was 1967, 68. And, you know, black was becoming beautiful. And I didn't want to do that. So I took it back to this lady and I can still almost feel that woman's breath because I was short. I was 5'2" or so, 5'3" in, you know, in 10th grade. And I said, no, ma'am, I don't think this is something that I want to do. And she didn't ask me why. She didn't ask me, you know, any of that. She just leaned over and said, "Do you want to see me put one of these white boys up there in blackface?"
Mm.
Now I don't know what made her say that to me at that time, but it struck a chord in me. I didn't want to see that.
Right.
You know, I didn't want anybody else to see that. But it also occurred to me that that's what she had been doing for years
Right.
out of necessity. And you know that day was gone. And somewhere in my mind, I think I decided I can bring some sort of dignity to this man. There's a whole nother truth to this character, and that's when I got into that drama class, and that's when I fell into the room with some kindred spirits. You know, prior to that, we ate lunch together. You know, we didn't we didn't go to the bathroom by ourselves at first because we didn't know what was going to be happening. If you know what I mean, in terms of integration
Right.
and what all that meant was. So we were cautious, you know, about mixing, about mixing in. Didn't know we didn't know what we didn't feel wanted for one. You know what I mean? You know that we were bust out there, so we were kind of being forced on people. So we just. But when I got into that class, it was about the play, you know, and that was different than you know in you know in a biology class I did feel some competition, you know, just some academic competitive sort of stuff with a few of the white boys and girls. But you know, I was up for that. You know,
Right.
I wasn't afraid of that. I did realize that no, I'm just as smart as you are. This isn't going to be that. But I did have a teacher accuse me of buying a paper that I wrote that went down to public library downtown. I don't know how many times uh, doing the research on it on reproduction, and she accused me of buying it. I was like, how in the hell do you think I could afford to go buy a paper? That was the first seed that I ever made in school, was in that biology class. But that's something else. That's another story.
So this first character that you took on in this play, in some ways, was the antithesis of who you were, but somehow you came to the conclusion that you could embody some characteristics to bring this character up to a standard that you felt might change the way people viewed this character. Did you think that maybe was a spark that set you on a path of really liking and loving character development? Is there at some point, I know it's always a bunch of steps to a journey, but I always like to find those moments, right? Those crossroads moments in our lives that maybe we look back on, didn't realize they had a little bit bigger influence on us than we gave it credit for.
I know. I think you're absolutely onto something there. I'm learning the lines right now to Our Town, which I'm going to act in on campus, in a couple of months. What was it you just said that just echoes some of the stuff that he talks about in that play, about how big things in life like that begin.
Yeah.
He says, I'm awfully interested in how big things like a choice to get married or a choice to go into a certain career, how those things begin. How they get started. And I think I always cite that story, but I'd done plays before. I'd done little things at church, and in junior high school. But this was different. This was introduction into a whole nother process, a whole nother creative process. And I'd always been tinkered with drawing and with writing poems, little things. When I was feeling sad, I might write. I do kind of remember that a lot of stuff when I look back on them, they were all not depressed, but not happy things.
Right,
a lot of times.
That was your own way of some self-therapy back then, right? That's you expressed it, got it out, and maybe it came through in the form of
physician heal thyself, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also had a really supportive, family in terms of my creativity and my brother and my sister's creativity. It was encouraged. My mother had a high school education. She didn't have any college from in New Jersey, and my dad was from East Texas in the country, and and he left the country to go into the service, if you know what I mean, and to get the hell out of the woods.
Right.
But they were always encouraging of me. I mean, I took some fairly bold steps, and my father did voice some concern. Once I got over to that high school and I was the first black cheerleader at that high school, for example. And, they had four boys and four girls as cheerleaders. And I was the only, black kid. And there was that was an elected position. I became friends on my study hall with a couple of the cheerleaders that were there when I first got there. And they talked me into running for it because, I was 5'2", like I said, and I wasn't involved in basketball or football or anything like that. But I put my name in and I ran, and I know a lot of people voted for me thinking, oh, you'll never win, just like that. But I did win, and I caught a little bit of flack from the black kids, about that. My dad was worried because we did some gymnastics and some tricks, where I was throwing a white girl around. And my dad, he came to one of the football games. He was like, I'm a little bit worried about you.
Right.
Doing that. And I was like, yeah. And until then, I hadn't even thought about that, actually. I hadn't.
Right.
But it turned out to be not so much, not an issue at all. But it was just interesting to me that was his reaction to it. It was kind of like, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Probably born out of, one part wisdom and experience and one part fear and concern, right? Because his environment would have told him that might have been an issue. And so it sounds like you were leaning in. You had this kind of penchant toward leaning into just kind of going for it, not worrying so much about the naysayers, but you had a network of people that believed in you through your parents and through your family. So that's a huge ingredient to being successful in life is someone who along your journey believes in you, which I'm sure we'll get into that, how you do that for others now. But then you also, it sounds like you had this kind of drive, that 300% drive that just told you that you could do anything and you were going to do anything. And you just kept kind of going regardless of what the circumstance was around you.
And that's that I credit segregation with instilling that in me, if you know what I mean. That there was a double standard, a different standard for success in America for people of color.
Right. When you were in the South, the deep South too, in Texas, so it was probably even amplified more than maybe other parts, maybe further north. But it's everywhere. But I mean, it might have been even more magnified then, I would think, or there.
Yeah, man. Down in the country, the schools were colored schools, and I guess in the city they were colored too. The drinking fountains, I was acutely aware of colored only and white only drinking fountains. We actually thought jokingly that the white fountains had Kool-Aid in them or something special. You know what I mean? Till we snuck and tried it and realized, oh no, it's the same shit. It's the same stuff.
Oh, right.
But to see those signs go down, I always say I'm a part of what I call the transition generation. And there's a strange heavy burden on that generation, to make some choices, if you know what I mean, to make some choices to stay in the status quo mentality, or to grow beyond it, and oftentimes to prove a point, because I don't know where I learned it, maybe from my grandfather or somewhere like that, but slavery was never supposed to end. And a lot of people miss that in terms of history. And a lot of people got stuck in that place. And August Wilson, in his one-man show, he opens and he says, my ancestors have been in America since the early 17th century. And for the first 244 years, we never had a problem finding a job. But since 1863, it's been hell. And it's been hell because the attitudes and ideas that America had towards slaves followed them out of slavery and became entrenched in this nation's psyche. And a lot of people can never see Black people as anything beyond a slave. And I believe that it's a nuance in a new kind of way, but I think they're stuck in a place of superiority, let's say.
Right. Right.
So yeah, for me, it was about proving that I too was superior and capable.
So what made the transition then for you? So you come out of that in high school, and then where did you go? Like, I know that you ended up you had opportunities to do lots of things with your education and your intellect, but that somehow you ended up being, driving yourself toward the acting and the theater and all that part of life. You could have been a lawyer. There's so many things you could have done. What was the draw towards the career you ultimately chose with acting and theater?
I don't know. There's a part of me that says that I thought it would be easier, but I don't think that's really. I don't think that's what it is. I think there's some ego involved. I sit today sometimes, and my uncle always said to me that I would have made a brilliant attorney.
Well, you were accepted into law school, right? At one point.
In 1 week, and this is honest to God truth. I was teaching high school in Fort Worth. This was after I graduated from college, undergrad, and I had been working in theater in Dallas and worked in radio. I was a news announcer for KKDA Radio, Soul for the Southwest, in Dallas, Texas, and teaching high school. And I had taken the law school admission, the LSAT. I had auditioned for 5, I think, of the top MFA acting programs. I drove down to New Orleans, and there was and I auditioned for 5 of the top masters MFA in programs in acting. And then in that spring, the spring of '78, I guess it was, uh, I got I got a letter of acceptance in the South Texas Law School down in Houston. I got a letter of acceptance in the SMU's MFA acting program with a scholarship, like I'd be teaching some undergraduate classes and working on my master's. I got accepted in the NYU's MFA acting program. No scholarship, just accepted. And I got a part in a movie.
All in a week.
All in a week, I swear, between Monday and Friday. And it was like God was saying, okay, what are you going to do?
Right.
What are you going to do? And my analysis of the situation at the time led me to think, okay, why do I need a master's unless I just want to make more money teaching? That was my thinking at the time.
Right.
And law school, I said, okay, that's going to be there. You know, they're going to be there. They're going to be there. But I'm this chance to do this movie, and it was a movie. It was a TV movie called Cotton Candy, that's shot in Dallas, and it was the first time director. It was the director's first directing gig, and the director's name was Ron Howard.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Opie's coming out party.
Oh, he's coming out party, right? Pretty much, yeah. And I played a student, and I'd been teaching high school for 4 years, but I played a student because black don't crack. So I had my youthful vigor and vim or whatever. So I decided to make the movie, and I resigned from teaching, because it was in the spring, and I guess we shot for 6 weeks or so in Dallas. And after we were done shooting, I packed up all my stuff and took all my money out of retirement from teaching those 4 years and moved everything to Los Angeles.
Wow. We talked earlier about those moments, right? That 1 week you had those 3 offers and you had to make a choice. That's a pretty big moment in your life because that set the whole path to the next trajectory of your next chapter.
No, I've always been put where I was supposed to be by, one way or another. Either somebody got sick and I had to replace them, but I've always whatever choice I've made, if it was the wrong choice, it's been corrected. It's been corrected.
Right.
All along my career. So there have been a bunch of those. Yeah, there have been a bunch of those milestones, I call them, because the very first week that I was in Los Angeles, once I moved out there, the very first week I was there, maybe the second or third day I was there, my roommate from college had an audition for they were replacing Lionel on the Jeffersons. Remember that TV series, The Jeffersons?
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
The original Lionel left, and I don't remember what all that was about, but they were replacing him. And my roommate had an audition. I didn't have an audition, but I went with him, and I had my pictures and resumes from working in Dallas.
Yep.
So I just walked in. This was 1970, 78 or whatever it was. Yeah. And I put mine on this pile, and I went in. They called me in to see Jane Murray, and I read for her. And she looked at me and she looked at my resume and she said, "You don't have an agent here?" I said, "No, ma'am, I just got here." And so she sat down and wrote down some agents' names for me. And she said, "Okay, when you leave here, I want you to make some phone calls and let these agents know that I'm bringing you back for this role. And I want you to come back tomorrow for the producers and read for the producers." And I left that room with a list of agents to call. And by 3:00 that afternoon or whatever, I had 2 agents ready to sign me. Based on the fact that I was going back for this thing that day. I went back. I didn't get that job, but I got an agent out of it. And a week later, I got a call from Jane Murray, same lady, and I ended up doing a guest star on an episode of Good Times.
Okay.
So everything just kind of led to the next thing, so to speak.
You have like the anti-Hollywood story. People talk about that. I sold everything and moved to LA, and I lived in a van down by the river and waited tables and never got a gig for a year. Like, you showed up, and it's kind of like you had this favor on you, and every one step led to the next step, which led to the next step. And you just kept going, knowing that, hey, I didn't get that gig, but I got an agent.
Right.
Next agent. Oh, I got a guest starring role. And then it sounds like you just kept working and working and working, driving, and the opportunities present themselves. I tell my kids all the time, like, you don't look at somebody like they're lucky. It takes a lot of hard work to be lucky. Right.
Well, it's like that story of the guy that said, "Oh God, please help me win the lottery. Help me win the lottery." He went for weeks just praying to God to help him win the lottery. And God finally heard from God. God said, "Well, you got to buy the ticket. You got to put yourself in the game."
That's right.
You do. That's and that takes a fearlessness, if you know what I mean.
That's right.
Because my first year out of college, I was teaching high school in Fort Worth, Texas. I was working in Dallas doing everything from industrial films for Gulf Oil, management training films, to commercials. Eventually, I did get on the radio for a couple of years. For the last 2 years, I was teaching there. The second 2 years, and doing theater in Dallas. So I was staying busy, and I got an agent in Dallas, and I kept a log. I can't remember if it was the first year out or the second year out, but I kept a log of every time I left my house seeking work as an actor. I had a teaching job. And whenever I'd get a gig, that they get a substitute for me to teach my classes and stuff. But every time I left my house, whether it was to take photos or whatever it was acting related, I kept a log. And I left my house 225 days that year, seeking work as an actor, doing one thing, auditions and one thing or another. And out of those 225, I got 5 jobs.
Wow.
That means that 220 times I was told no, basically. And my agent said to me, she said, that's an important lesson to learn in this business. So you don't take this stuff personally. So you don't take no personally. You just were not the piece of meat that they wanted for this, Yeah. And I think that attitude is kind of like an asbestos kind of coating or whatever. It's like I can just brush stuff. I go do them and I forget about them. In terms of auditions, I'd prepare. Of course, I'd prepare, and I'd go do them and forget about them. And oftentimes be surprised when I did, feel like I get them. But I've also sometimes gone in and felt like, oh, I hit that. If they don't hire me, they're crazy.
And they were crazy. That's right. But I think that's such a valuable lesson, right? In this next generation, well, every generation. But I tell my kids, the harder I work, the luckier I get. But it's the persistence to never give up.
Right.
It's the persistence to never give up, never give up. No matter what it is, just keep moving forward and believe that you've got value to add. And God's going to put you in the right seat on the right bus at the right time. And if you don't get on that bus, then you weren't meant to be on that bus, right?
Right. It's, Adolf Caesar, rest his soul. I did a soldier's play with him. He introduced me to my wife. Anyway, but he told all of us, people like Denzel and Sam and myself, we were the young bucks, at that time doing a soldier's play. And he's like, you got to last. He said, you're good, but you got to last. He said, you got to stay in line. It's like when you get into this business, it's like you get into a long line. And, you and every now and then you get to move up a little bit, right? He said, right. Key is to stay in line, to stay healthy, to stay on top of your craft, but to stay in line, because every minute somebody in front of you gets out of line. And that's when you get to move up.
That's
he said,
right.
But you got to stay in line, and every minute somebody in front of you in that line takes that midnight train to Georgia.
That's right.
And it's like, okay, they quit, and also some other lessons that I kind of learned when I had to teach this stuff. When I had to teach acting in high school, when I came out, it was the ultimate test for what I had learned. And it was also the ultimate test for what I was going to learn and for what they needed to learn. And I used to talk to my acting students or drama students about defining your own success, you know, and not trying to live up to someone else's definition of what success is for you. I've always embraced that, you know. It's because I don't think I ever really targeted. I also teach, you know, you'll never hit anything that you don't aim at.
Right.
And but I never targeted fame or fortune or, you know, millions of dollars even. I kind of figured that if I was the best actor that I could be, if I was the best artist that I could be, if I found a way to communicate truth with clarity, you know, if I could be that articulate, that clear, if I could create characters with that kind of clarity and truth, that all that other stuff would fall in.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
So what was it like back in those early days? I think you were in New York when you were hanging out with Denzel and Samuel L. and those guys all working on stuff together. What was it? What were those younger guys like? What were you like during that time? Like what, because people know them from the movies now and all that. You're arguably way more diverse of a career than they've had, but they kind of, now they're kind of know, those two guys especially are known for their movies, right? So what were they like at a younger age, and what were you like during that time as well?
Well, we were wild and fearless, you know, in a
Yeah.
way, and looking for the next, you know, like hungry like sharks, looking for the next meal, looking for that next job that was going to take us, that was going to assure us a job after that, if you know what I mean. And,
Right.
and I don't recall conversations about, oh, I'm going to be a superstar, I'm going to be an international, you know, uh, household name or any. We just were trying. I mean, I think when we did Soldier's Play, we were making like $99 or $199 a week, you know, off Broadway.
Right.
That was a gig, and it won the Pulitzer Prize, you know,
Right.
and we got some raises and stuff like that. But we also used to talk about, you know, there were poker games, you know, hanging out at bars, but bull sessions backstage, you know, in dressing rooms, talking about the fact that we probably couldn't, as Black actors, we probably couldn't just be actors, that we needed to diversify, which is why you see people like Denzel doing as much directing when those opportunities present themselves as he does acting. And Sam is producing a bunch of stuff. You know,
Right.
we talked about longevity, you know, because I think if we had any targets for ourselves, real targets, you know, it's just to be in this to the end. You know, I know for certain that I targeted longevity. And one way to assure longevity in this business was to diversify, to broaden your base, we used to say, which is why I started writing. You know, I mean, we were working with the Negro Ensemble Company, the prestigious Negro Ensemble Company. Um, and not everybody got a chance to work there, if you know what I mean. I learned so much about
Right.
the craft because Douglas Turner Ward, he worked me. I mean, I think I did every play that the NEC did for like 4 seasons. And that's when I learned how to act. You know, of course, now 2 of those seasons was one play, Soldier's Play. You know, it was their
Right.
biggest hit up until that time. But he did work me after that. It was almost like being in rep. We'd be rehearsing the next one while we're doing this one at night, if you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
that's when I learned how to act. I learned about acting in college, but I learned how to act on the job training in New York.
Totally different. Right. Totally different.
Totally different. It's just, you know, I learned the standards, the professional standards, and I learned how to find a play, because, you know, I jokingly say we the Negro Ensemble Company only did new plays. They didn't do revivals. They only did new plays. So we basically snatched these plays off of these people's typewriters and stood them up. So that process of finding a play, that's what I call it now. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, I sat through that. Oh God, I don't know how many times at the feet of people like August Wilson and Douglas Turner Ward and Sam Art Williams and Gus Edwards, people who were writing plays by us, for us, and about us. And so I really had a charmed sort of theatrical stage career in New York. I was with Crossroads Theater Company, a Black theater company in New Jersey, when they first started. They were a CETA program, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. Yeah, that's how we got paid to do theater. It's a part of a CETA
Right.
program. And they started one of the premier black theater companies in the country. And I left from there and went straight to the Negro Ensemble Company in New York and working with them. And from there, I worked with August Wilson and Lloyd Richards and those people doing his plays. So mine really has been sort of a charmed kind of. Now, I don't mean to imply that I have done no white theater, because that would be a lie. I've even done Shakespeare, at the Mart Taper Forum with Kelsey Grammer, during Richard III, I think it was, or Richard II, one of them. But, I've crossed some cultural lines. I speak Spanish, so uh, I was on a soap opera speaking. I was on a guiding light for 18 months, almost 2 years, speaking Spanish. I had the audition while I was doing a soldier's play. The lady called me up. She said, "You speak Spanish, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Say
See,
something."
you
This,
said
this,
see.
this was no, this was over the phone. She called me up and she said, "Say something to me in Spanish." I said, "Algo a ti en español." She said, "What did you say?" I said, "Something to you in Spanish." She said, "Can you come down for a wardrobe fitting?" And it
That's
was
great.
originally supposed to be like one week or one day or something, and it just kept growing. And they built. I was on an island with some people, an island called San Rios, and the people on my island were dying from the dreaded dreaming disease. And these people from, oh God, where are the white people from? Where are they from? They're from some city in the States, but they were coming down to study this phenomenon. And so I asked me, I had a bird on my shoulder. I had a big straw hat on, and I was translating for the people on my island and the white people that were there to help my
Right.
people who were dying from. And I spent a lot of time covering up bodies,
Right.
and
Right. Right. So what I heard you say, though, I think it's because I want to give you some time to talk about East Texas hot links as we close. But a couple of really valuable lessons I heard you say is, number one, obviously persistence, perseverance. Don't take it personally. Rejection is part of anybody's drive and anybody's path. But then this idea of don't get out of line. But I think then what I heard you say on top of that is, and don't maybe don't just stick to one line. Diversify. Maybe you got to get in 3 lines and don't get out of any of them.
and most important, as important, and maybe most important, is learn how you learn. And that's related to so many things. Just like lines, to learn lines. I can't tell you the number of jobs that I've gotten because I have a reputation for learning lines. And if you need me to if you need me to do Shakespeare in 3 days, you got it. I'll show up with the words.
Because you know your own mechanism on how to do that. You've got a framework for that.
I've learned how to learn and how to and how to. Well, some people say embody, even not just comprehend in an intellectual or what way, but to translate that into actual physical embodiment.
Internalize that dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about East as we close here because we're running out of time. Tell us a little bit about East Texas Hot Links. I know it's opening in Chicago here on September 6th. Tell us a little bit about that.
East Texas Hot Links. I sat down to write an episode of Twilight Zone, and what ended up is this play, East Texas Hot Links. I said to my wife, "I'm going to write a play tonight," and she said, "Oh, okay, yeah, right." And I said, "I need a title," and she was reading the newspaper, and the first word she saw was restaurant. So she said, "Restaurant." I said, "Okay, restaurant. Rest your aunt. Give your daddy's sister a break. Rest your aunt." No, but that took me to food, and that took me to the food chain. And that's what this place speaks to, how we feed off of each other. And that was how that play was birthed. And I just wrote to that. I was inspired by Rod Serling and what he could do in 30 minutes with one character in one room. And just in terms of character development, just in terms of, and no language in at least one of those, the old woman, I can't remember what the name of that particular episode was, but it was amazing, the storytelling. His story. And Patty Chayefsky was somebody else, another writer whose writing inspired me to tell the stories and to tell my stories, if you know what I mean. To tell the stories
Yeah.
about the people that I sat on the porch in East Texas listening to Big Mama and them talk about when they were shelling peas at night. to hear those stories. To hear those stories about, my family was apparently owned by Robert E. Lee's family, his sons in East Texas.
Wow.
And to hear the story about a great, maybe just too great grandmother, uh, when her husband was sold away from them back off in the woods. And I just remember my grandmother telling us about that story and about how this woman, you could hear her wailing in the woods for miles, when her husband was sold and taken away from her.
Wow.
So those there's an anthology of my plays that's about to be published, and I had to come up with a title for it. And the publisher said, well, why don't you, since East Texas Hot Links is a premiere, why don't you say East Texas Hot Links and Other Plays by Eugene Lee? And I said, no, I don't know if I like that so much, but it's called. I just called it Texas Truth Be Told. Truth Be Told, collected plays, because that's what I've tried to do. Is the truth has lost so much value recently, and it's important to me that it get out. But East Texas Hot Links, that was the inspiration for it. It's I used to always be concerned because I always thought white people would not come to see a black play because they felt like they were going to be the villains every time,
Right.
And I didn't want any of my plays to do that to any potential person who could learn from my plays. That they would shun them prior to even giving them a chance. So the villain in East Texas Hot Links is a Judas goat, and it's in-house stuff.
Right.
But I also have it's also dawned on me what I've done with this play, and I didn't set out to do it consciously. Is I've shed some light into a dark place. Some people have said I've aired some dirty laundry, but I've provided some insight into the African American experience. When I take you into a colored only little bar back off in the woods in East Texas, a place that a white person never would set foot in, back in the 50s when this play takes place. But this is a place where these black people nurture and nourish their spirits and with storytelling. And it's not all they're not all the truth, but
Right.
but in order to sell a lie, it's got to have an ounce of truth. So
That's right. And so this is opening. It's played before, though, right? Or is this his first opening in the Court Theater on September 6th?
oh no, well, at the Court, it's the first time it's been done on the south side of Chicago at the Court, but it's been done there 4 times. It's been done.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
They love this play in Chicago. I'm excited to get to see it again there. They love it there.
Well, as we kind of close here and land the plane, I mean, your work spans multiple decades. You've had such an influence, and now you're, as you think about this next season in your life, what do you hope that this would be the last question? Like, really, what do you hope if somebody were to summarize your legacy, what do you hope they would say?
I hope they'll say that he was a good man, that he told the truth. And that he changed some things. I want to write. I want to make art that changes the world, and I recognize the changes that need to happen in the world are changes that happen one individual at a time. If you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
It's a. Yeah, and I'm a teacher at heart. That's I mean, I guess that's what I want people to say, that I taught with my work, that I taught with my life. When I act with these students on campus, I teach by example. If you know what I mean, by showing up day one off book, and right. And knowing the lines, that to help them become acquainted with those professional standards, because I think that's going to help them more than anything down the line.
Well, this show, obviously, as you know, is called the Driving Change podcast, and the fact that having someone on like you who spent his whole life dedicated to driving change, one story at a time, one listener at a time, one actor at a time, one conversation at a time. You are the embodiment of what the spirit of this show is. And so thank you for your voice. Thank you for what you're doing in the world and how you're bringing light to dark places and how you're helping a lot of people see things that need to be seen in order to move the conversation forward. One conversation at a time. So thank you for being a guest. We'd love to have you back on at some point and get an update on how things are going and just see what else you got cooking in the coming months.
Things are heating up this year. So yeah, let's do that, man. This has been fun for me. Actually, it's been more fun than I thought it was going to be. I'll admit that. I've never been one to toot my own horn, if you know what I mean. I've always been kind of shy to talk about myself. But I kind of got excited doing this.
Well, I brought you on so I could help toot it for you. That's my job. Well, it's been an honor. We will definitely have you back on. Thanks again. And just hang tight real quick and we'll be talking again soon.
All right, man. Peace out.